Okay, welcome everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, will come back to me and ask the chair whether it's possible to speak, as I was said in the email, according to the letter.
I've been advised that within the email it didn't say you wanted to speak, so I'm sorry, I can't allow you to speak. I'll just take further advice. Just give me 1 minute. I'm sorry. I've been advised that that it's correct that you will not be able to speak at this. I'm terribly sorry. Noted. Okay, welcome to the Planning Committee, everybody, the March Gedling Planning Committee. Just like to, before we start the meeting, just like to make a point of saying that it is live streamed and recorded. And as we have observers present, I'd like to introduce the top table. I'm Councillor Roy Allen, I'm the chair of the committee. To my right is Natalie O.C. and Lauren Sturgis, they are legal officers. And to their right is Kate Goodall, Democratic Services Officer. To my left is Mike Avery, who is the Head of Development and Place. Nigel Bryan, who is the Development Manager. Craig Miles, who is a Principal Planning Officer. And Claire Turton, who is also a Principal Planning Officer. Before we start the committee, I'd like to just inform the speakers that you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and when you start, please press the red button on the microphone at the lectern. And if you're running out, if you're still speaking when 3 minutes is up, I will stop you. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the planning agenda. Agenda item 1, do we have any apologies for absence and substitution? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillors Walker, Beswick and Greensmith. Substitute Councillor Mike Adams.
Thank you. Any other apologies or substitutes? No. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is the draft minutes of the last meeting. I'd like to propose them as a true and correct record of the last meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson, thank you. Any comments at all on the draft minutes? Okay, thank you. Shall we move to the vote? All those in favour of agreeing that the draft minutes are a true and correct record, please raise their hands. And anyone against? And any abstentions? Thank you, that's carried. Can I just bring your attention to the planning protocol in the committee agenda? Please make sure you're familiar with it. I'd like to go to agenda item 3, which is a declaration of interest. Are there any pecuniary or non-pecuniary declarations of interest? No. I'd like to, on behalf of the whole committee, declare a non-pecuniary declaration of interest on items 8 and 9, as they are Gedling Borough applications and they are on Gedling Borough land. So now we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the land off George's Lane, Cowerton. We have one speaker on this item. It is the applicant, Matthew Limrose. Is Matthew Limrose here? Do you want to move to the lectern? Okay, please press the red button and start when ready. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matthew Limrose and I'm the Managing Director of AW Lim, the Family Funeral Service. As detailed within the officer's report, our site received planning permission for a burial ground in August 2022, and we are working with the planning officers to discharge the conditions. The previous permission deals with pedestrian and vehicle access as well as parking, none of which are hurdles to today's application. Concerns over the height of the covered barrow led to planning refusal last year. This evening you will be shown images which demonstrate that meetings with planning officers led to significant changes which have addressed those concerns. The scheme does involve built form, which raised concerns about the openness of the green belt. Having moved the covered barrow to a natural hollow in the landscape, we are pleased the council accept the impact on openness is significantly reduced. Earmarking this area of land for natural burial and the barrows will prevent unnatural headstones and memorials from impacting on the openness going forwards. The officer's report details the significant, very special circumstances and highlights the civic need, the benefits to the people of Gedling Borough and the high levels of local demand for these barrows. The scheme will have demonstrable environmental benefits, such as the creation and improvement of habitats and an overall net ecological gain. The natural environment is also protected by avoiding the potentially detrimental impact that burial and scattering of cremated remains in a concentrated area may have. We have had a successful public open day in early March and received dozens of positive comments from the general public, as well as supportive neighbours, a number of whom have chosen to voice their support on the planning portal. While there are other barrows in the UK, this particular scheme, with a covered barrow and 2 open barrows, will not only be the first of its kind in our country, but the entire world, which would really put Gedling on the map. For any members who are still hesitant to support the application, please may I leave you with 2 thoughts. Firstly, and very importantly, this scheme is now recommended for approval following very proactive engagement with the officers. Secondly, the following quote was given by a Gedling Borough Council resident. They said, "I've had my mother's ashes at home for a number of years and have not known what to do with them. I've read your application and this is it." Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Claire Turton will introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of updates before the presentation. Paragraph 7.41 of the committee report relates to a Section 106 agreement. The committee report states that the Section 106 agreement would ensure that if planning permission were to be granted, works could not commence on this current proposal until the previous planning permission was substantially complete. This should read that if planning permission were to be granted, this current proposal could not be brought into use until the previous permission was substantially complete. And just a second update, the site location plan on page 19 of the public document pack is incorrect. It should be as shown on the screen now. So this application proposal is for the construction of 2 open round barrows and a grass covered barrow for the placement of cremation urns, access path and landscaping. There is relevant planning history at the site. Planning permission was granted in 2002 on the larger site for a burial ground and associated structures. This permission is still extant but has not yet been implemented. So the area in the blue line has permission for a cemetery, and it's specifically the area in the red line that we're looking at today. Planning permission was refused in July 2023 for the construction of 2 open rounded barrows and a grass covered barrow. It's the image on the left that's the previous refusal, and the image on the right is what we're looking at today. The reasons for refusal related to the size and scale of the development, which was not considered to preserve the openness of the green belt and was also considered to have an undue impact on the visual amenity and landscape character of the area. This current planning application is a resubmission of the 2023 planning refusal with the aim of reducing the scale of the development. Barrow 3 is a grass-covered barrow. This has been relocated and reorientated from the previous proposal so that it sits within an existing hollow in the landscape and is buried into the rising topography. Barrow 3 will raise the ground level by approximately 6 metres directly above the barrow, which will then be levelled. Previously, it was 9 metres above ground level and on a higher part of the site. This results in the top of Barrow 3 in the previous refusal being located 4 metres above the height of the adjacent footpath, whereas the top of Barrow 3 in the current proposal is located 4 metres below the height of the footpath. The applicants were asked whether the height of Barrow 3 could be reduced even further. However, due to the self-supporting construction of the roof of the barrow, this was not possible. Barrows 1 and 2, these are the open wall barrows. The height of barrows 1 and 2 have been reduced. They were previously 2.7 metres in height from ground level to the top of the wall, but are now 2 metres above the existing ground level. And these are similar in appearance to walls that can be erected up to 2 metres in height under permitted development rights. So I'll go back to that comparison picture. Paragraph 154B of the MPPF is most pertinent to the application and states that, in respect of the greenbelt, certain uses are appropriate, and I quote, "The provision of appropriate facilities in connection with the existing use of land or a change of use for outdoor sport, outdoor recreation, cemeteries and burial grounds and allotments, as long as the facilities preserve the openness of the green belt and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it." Therefore, the key judgment in this instance is not the principle of development, rather it is whether or not the structures proposed preserve the openness of the green belt. It is considered that the proposal has been reduced in scale, relocated and reorientated as much as possible whilst ensuring the scheme is viable to reduce the impact on the openness of the green belt. However, there is still some built form and the proposal does still have some impact on the openness of the green belt, albeit much less than the previous proposal. If you can see the cursor. This area here is the area being built up. It is considered that the proposal cannot be amended any further to reduce the scale whilst remaining viable. However, it does have to be concluded that the development is considered to be an appropriate development within the green belt. Paragraph 152 of the MPPF states, and I quote, "Inappropriate development is, by definition, harmful to the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. It is considered that in this specific case, very special circumstances do exist to justify the granting of planning permission. The applicant has submitted evidence regarding this. This centres around the overriding need for such a facility in the borough. Cremations, rather than burials, represent the primary choice for all funerals in the UK and account for 80% of services. Barrows provide a separate function to cemeteries and crematoriums. The nearest existing Borough facilities are located at a site in Cambridgeshire, a distance of 127 kilometres from this site. There are no facilities to deliver this service in Gedling or Nottinghamshire. The applicants state that they have already received numerous expressions of interest and inquiries related to the reservation of niches within the barrows. It is preferable to locate such a facility in a cemetery where it can form a multi-purpose service through the provision of both indoor and outdoor burial ceremonies. The settlements within Gedling Borough are all closely bound by Greenbelt. To enable the barrows to fully deliver on their function, they should be located in a quiet location, which effectively requires a rural location. For the reasons stated above, it is considered that in this specific case, very special circumstances do exist to justify the granting of planning permission, even though the proposal does still have some impact on the openness of the green belt, albeit much less than the previous proposal. As a result, the application is recommended for approval. And I'll just leave you with some photos of the site and then some images, if planning permission were to be approved, what it would look like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. I'd like to propose agenda item 4 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Does anyone want to speak? Councillor Catherine Pope.
I just wanted to recognise the work that had gone to try and fit in with the objections that we raised previously, and I think I'll be recommending that we approve this.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo what Councillor Pope has just said. I'd like to congratulate the officers and the applicants for the way they've worked together to produce an acceptable scheme. I'm certainly satisfied that the very special circumstances have been met and that a very sympathetic development has been brought forward, and I'd be happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other speakers at all? Okay, in that case, we'll move to the vote. The recommendation is to grant permission. All those in favour? Thank you. That was unanimous. So the recommendation was carried. For those watching on YouTube, we just waited a few seconds whilst people left the room. I'd like to move on to agenda item 5, land off Marion Avenue, Hucknall. We have 2 speakers on this item. Ashley Ankret, who is a resident objector, and Clayton Penny, the applicant. Could Ashley move to the lectern, please? And as usual, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening. I'm Ashley Ankret, speaking on behalf of the residents around Marion Avenue. We're here to speak in opposition to the new development plan of Hayden Lane. We all want the town to grow and thrive, but it's critical we do it in a way that works for everyone and doesn't create more problems than it solves. First off, I want to talk about the traffic issues. Our roads are already over busy, and this new development is only going to make things worse. The development is on Gedling land, but access is through a small cul-de-sac in Ashfield. The dustbin lorry already struggles servicing the 7 houses on Marion Avenue. I'm not sure how it's going to serve 37. It's very tight down there. We all want to keep the streets safe and less congested, there are always cars racing down, cutting through to Papwick Green and the new Sherwood Gate development. I've got CCTV footage of incidents to support our safety concerns. I've got them with me. There's been some quite serious crashes. Next, there's issues around parking. With more people moving in, we're going to need more parking spaces. The current plan doesn't provide enough parking, which means we'll end up with cars everywhere, making it hard for residents to park near their homes. One of the residents on Marion Avenue has a child with special needs and must be collected and dropped off each day by ambulance. The child's mother has spoken concerns regarding parking and access with the new development. Also, how safe is the new proposed drainage pool going to be for children? Also, the schools, doctors and dentists around Hucknall up to capacity. With more houses, this is only going to get worse. Also, really concerned about the trees that were removed from the land. Cutting down trees without permission is just wrong. The trees make the environment better, help clean the air, and provide space for the wildlife. The trees on the land were removed before any surveys were carried out. There was a huge amount of wildlife in the woodland before the trees were felled. We need to prevent them from chopping down trees just for the sake of development. I've got before and after drone footage if anyone's interested. To finish up, I'm all for progress. We need a development plan that considers our current needs and respects the environment. I hope the committee will take these concerns seriously and rethink the proposed plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Would Mr. Penny like to approach the lectern? And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. By way of brief background to the applicants, Chevin Homes is an award-winning Derby-based house builder who has a strong track record of delivering high-quality homes across the East Midlands. Most recently in Gedling, members of this committee in December 2022 granted Chevin Homes a detailed planning permission for 11 dwellings in Burton Joyce, a development which is now almost complete. The proposal before you this evening is for the development of 30 dwellings on land to the south of the Sherwood Gate development, with access to be provided directly off Marion Avenue within the main urban area of Hucknall. A variety of house types are proposed, including bungalows, terraced, semi-detached and detached houses. A policy-compliant 9 houses are set aside as affordable, which, should permission be granted, will be secured through a Section 106 legal agreement, along with substantial financial contributions to education, healthcare, play areas and bus stop improvements. As set out in the case officer's detailed and thorough planning committee report, the principle of residential development is already considered acceptable, as the application site forms part of the strategic housing allocation, land north of Papwick Lane, for up to 300 homes allocated under Policy 2 of the aligned core strategy. 255 dwellings of the 300 allocated have already been or are in the process of being delivered, which leaves a current shortfall of 45 dwellings. The proposals also comply with Policy HSG1 of the Maid Limby Neighbourhood Plan. We have worked proactively with the case officer, to whom we are grateful, and are pleased to present to members a scheme for consideration which is policy compliant and has no outstanding consultee or technical objections. The scheme has been carefully considered to take into account any constraints and has sought to minimise any potential impact on the character and appearance of the area, as well as residential amenity. Detailed landscaping proposals have been produced to enhance the open space areas of the site as far as possible. The removal of the trees is not a planning matter, and as set out in the officer report, it is unavoidable to deliver the allocated housing. The Council's tree officer has confirmed that they are satisfied with the management and proposed tree plan for the scheme. Other than scale, this application is consistent with the Barwood Homes Cora application on the adjacent site, which members of this committee resolved to grant in October last year. A footpath link has been included within our scheme to provide potential connectivity between the two sites, should both sites ultimately be granted planning permission. When having regard to all matters raised and when assessed against the relevant policies in the local plan, neighbourhood plan and the MPPF taken as a whole, it is considered that planning permission should be granted, given that there is a clear and convincing justification for the scheme. I therefore invite you to follow the advice of your officers and respectfully ask that you approve the application this evening. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Craig Miles will now introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Just run you through the site location and what's proposed. Application site is located off Hayden Lane, Hucknall. The site comprises of a single field that's been cleared of vegetation. It's enclosed by existing hedgerows run along the perimeter of the site boundary, and the site measures some 1.16 hectares. The site's importantly allocated in their development plan for housing. On the north side, the site adjoins Sherwood Gate residential development, which is a development of approximately 255 dwellings. And adjoining the site to the west is the recently consented Barwood Homes development for 131 dwellings, with access through Delhi Avenue and Dorothy Avenue. The site itself is not identified as being at a high risk of flooding, and there's no statutory environmental designations or heritage assets on or directly adjacent to the site. Almost all of the land where the dwellings are proposed would be located within Gedling Borough Council, and only a very small proportion of the application site falls within Ashfield District Council. And if you look on that plan, it's actually the land beyond the blue dotted line that's in Ashfield. Only Marion Avenue would be used to access the site, which also falls within Ashfield District. Now, because the application site crosses two administrative boundaries, the applicant would therefore need to get permission from both Gedling and Ashfield District Council for the proposals. As I mentioned previously, the site's allocated in our development plan. It was actually allocated in the line core strategy way back in 2014 as part of a wider urban extension for 300 dwellings. Now, of that, only 255 dwellings have actually been consented and will be completed, leaving a shortfall of 45 dwellings. In terms of what's proposed, the application is for 13 dwellings, which is shown in this layout plan here. In terms of the principle of development, the site's allocated for a residential use, so there's no issues in respect of the principle of development. In terms of design and layout, it's considered that development includes a range of 2 and 3 bedroom properties, as well as dwellings of 1 and 2 stories in scale. I'll just show you some pictures. Nine of the properties identified as being affordable, of which 3 would be first homes and remaining 6 dwellings would be affordable rented properties, which would comprise of 2 and 3 bedroomed. The layout of the proposed development has been designed where possible with perimeter blocks formation that enables continuous roadside frontages and enclosed rear gardens. The landscape proposals show that there would be enhanced landscaping planting to the northwest corner of the site and to a lesser extent throughout the site. On the east part of the site would be a large retaining pond that would be landscaped. It's also proposed to create a footpath link to the north, just on the northern point of that, northwestern point of that layout plan there. Overall, it's considered that the development would result in a scheme that would respect the character of the area and have a appropriate density. It should also be noted the location, setting and topography also means that very few public views of the application site. And of those views, they are generally from the end of Allison Avenue and Marion Avenue. In respect of highways, it's proposed to access via a new T-junction, which would be an extension of Marion Avenue that presently forms a cul-de-sac. There's no proposals to access the site from Allison Avenue, which is the one on the west side of that picture, image there. The transportation assessment submitted concludes that appropriate level of parking would be available to serve the proposed development, and also concludes it would not have a negative impact on the local highway network in terms of safety. The Highway Authority have responded to state that they have considered the submitted transportation assessment and have no objections to the proposals on the basis that the traffic generation from the site would be acceptable within the wider highway network and the layout and parking provision is appropriate. I should also note that the parking provision also exceeds the Council's own SPD on parking standards. You should note that access via Marion Avenue needs to be constructed prior to any occupation of any dwelling, and it would mean that permission would first be required for the access via Ashfield District Council. The proposal is not considered to cause any acceptable issues of massing, overshadowing or overbearing impact onto neighbouring occupiers due to separation distance from the proposed and existing dwellings. Of course, the main impact on amenity would be through the formation of the new access point via Marion Avenue, but this matter has already been considered as part of the allocation of the site in the development plan through examination when it was approved by the Secretary of State and subsequently adopted by Gedling Borough Council. Traffic would increase along Marion Avenue as a result of the proposal, and there would be some inevitable disruption during the construction phase of development. However, the delivery of an allocated site is also of national and local policy requirements. The layout of the proposals details dwellings set back from the boundary of this access point and in between an area of small open space to provide a buffer between existing and proposed dwellings. A construction management plan would also mitigate impact during the construction phase of development and is proposed as a planning condition. In terms of trees, the objector is quite right, the site was cleared and in fact they submitted a survey of what was there, and it was 29 individual trees and 13 groups of trees that were removed from the site to facilitate development on it. Our tree officer has been consulted on this and come to the conclusion none of those trees were of any sufficient merit, and more particularly they weren't subject to a tree preservation order. There are 3 tree preservation orders on the site on the northwest boundary, but those trees are seek to be retained and protected as part of the proposed development. The tree officer confirms that he's satisfied with the tree protection method as proposed, and he's content with the proposed level of replacement planting. This can be secured via a planning condition. Now, in terms of ecology and biodiversity, the removal of the trees has had a negative impact on the site, clearly. The applicant sought to maximise the provision of on-site biodiversity as much as possible, whilst also ensuring development remains viable and deliverable. Proposed areas of open space has incorporated a number of measures to enhance biodiversity, as outlined in the report. The applicants also offered an off-site payment for biodiversity net gain, but it's acknowledged that Policy 18 does not allow for any off-site mitigation. It stated that the loss of habitat should be weighed against the benefits of the proposal. At national level, there is currently no requirement to provide biodiversity net gain, as this application was registered in March 2023, prior to legislation coming into force. In this instance, the development of 30 dwellings would contribute towards meeting the authority's housing standards targets by developing on an allocated site. In this scenario, it's considered that mitigation measures are set out in both the ecological impact assessment and the biodiversity net gain document is sufficient to meet the requirements as set out in Policy LDP Policy 18. Also should be noted that Nature England do not object to this application. Almost there. Right. So in relation to planning obligations, the proposals are fully policy compliant. That means 30% of affordable housing has been provided, an education contribution of 131,000 towards secondary provisions provided, a post-education contribution of 26,000 is to be provided, an off-site contribution for off-site play equipment of almost 50,000 is proposed, and another 20,000 for its future maintenance. A contribution towards NHS primary care provision is also proposed of £16,000, and that would go into surgeries based within the Hucknall area. It's also proposed and agreed to provide bus stop improvements of some £7,700. So in summary, it's considered that the proposal is consistent with local and national planning policies. The principle of development is accepted, and we're content with the design, scale and layout. The replacement tree planting locations and numbers are acceptable. The proposed development is policy compliant in relation to developer contributions, and we don't think there'd be a significant unacceptable impact on residential amenity of occupiers close by the site or future residents. The parking provision and access is considered acceptable. There's no highway objections from the Highway Authority. There are no other issues in respect of flooding and drainage, archaeology, noise, contamination, as either sufficient information has been provided or a condition has been applied. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions outlined in the report and the owner entering into a Section 106 agreement to secure those planning obligations that I've raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I'd like to propose agenda item 5 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ellis. Thank you. Does anyone want to speak on this item? Councillor Whiting.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. A couple of points one point of clarification, if I may. In the report 414, it says that there was no response received from Severn Trent Water at the time, but is there any update to report to the meeting? Please, Chair.
There isn't a further update. No, there's no further update in relation to Trent Water. That's to do with the connections of the site into the water system.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, I understand the residents' concerns, especially around the traffic, because it seems to me from that map that we've got on the screen there, that is there any reason why access couldn't have been from Allison Avenue and Marion Avenue? It seems that that would have taken some of the stress off. You've now got those 7 houses on Marion Avenue that are going to have to bear the brunt of potentially 45, 50 cars coming down. That's going to have a significant impact on the air quality of those residents. And taking into account what the officer said in his report as well, I note that in our report here at 413, Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, while not objecting in principle, note that there's no biodiversity net gain. And I understand that we've got to build houses, and I understand that this has been allocated, but it seems a shame that this parcel of land has been cleared of trees, and we're going to lose that habitat for the natural environment and the biodiversity that we had there. So I think I'm going to struggle to support this, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. My point's very similar to Councillor Whiting's. I was concerned about the access to this site, and I understand that the permission still has to be gained from Ashfield about using these roads, but we have a potential number of journeys along that road. If you have 49 parking spaces, that's potentially 98 per day. And that is rather the overuse of the small road which can be seen from Google Earth. I'm very worried about the design of this, and I do not understand why only one access point has been agreed on the design. As I said, I echo the concerns of Councillor Whiting on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any clarification on why there's no access?
Only one access has been designed because initially, when the applicant consulted with the Highway Authority, they considered only one access was required into the site, not two. So that's the reason why there is only one access.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, then Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. We have to judge the application as it's in front of us. And as the officers have said, this is policy compliant. It's been allocated for housing. It meets the parking standards. I'm pleased to see the Section 106 contributions. Unlike some of the other applications in front of us, this is a compliant and will offset some of the concerns that the residents have rightly raised about the effect on services in Hucknall. Highways are content with the access, and there are professional advisors, so I'm quite happy to accept their advice, and so I think on balance I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as we've heard, this is an allocated site and has been an allocated site for a long time. As Councillor Ellis says, we have to judge the application that is in front of us, and it is a policy compliance application. It would be very difficult, in fact, probably nigh on impossible, to sustain an objection on highway grounds when the Highway Authority itself has not raised any objections. Also, like Councillor Ellis, I'm very pleased to see the Section 106 contributions and agreement. I think that is very praiseworthy, and I congratulate the applicants on bringing that forward in terms of in accordance with our policy. So I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Ellis, and I'm minded to support this for those reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chair. I gather this is a detailed planning application rather than an outline application. I suppose my only concern is with regard to any future possibility of to the north of the site. There's apologies, I don't know what road it's called. Is there any way that could be connected up to the site? Because then you'd have a through road going right through the development site from the existing housing site to the north, which obviously would create a lot of traffic problems. So really just some reassurance that couldn't happen with this development.
I'm sorry, we'll have to consider the application as it stands. I'm sorry. That's what we're judging tonight. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. You don't hear me say this very often, but I agree with Councillor Ellis and I always forget his name. Councillor Wilkinson, sorry. I always forget his name as well. I'm sorry about. It would be we'd be taken to appeal if we rejected it because it's in our allocation plan. So our hands are kind of tied behind our back, which is hard for members of the public to understand, but I think that needs saying out loud. I do share concerns about the tree removal. I note that the report says there's 29 trees to be removed, but also if you read paragraph 6.30, it's pleasing to see that the trees that are TPO'd on the boundary will be remaining, and I think that's important for visual aspects. And 29 trees removed, 20 trees planted, as per paragraph 6.25, is pleasing as well that some of those trees that are being removed will be replaced and create natural habitat there. Also, picking up on the points that others have on the Section 106 stuff, the resident who spoke says about getting into doctor's appointments and stuff, and it's pleasing, paragraph 4.7, as others have said, you know, there is a contribution that this development will contribute about £16,000 towards the expansion of 2 doctor's surgeries, and also comes with funding for secondary schools as well, which obviously developments contribute. So we can't actually legally, well, we could, but if we voted against it, it'd go to appeal and get through anyway. So for that reason, I'm going to have to vote for it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? No. So we'll move to the vote. We're voting on agenda item 5. The recommendation is to grant permission. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Thank you. And any abstentions? Thank you. That was carried. So we'll move on to agenda item 6. A councillor has just left the room. Could give him 1 minute to come back. Please, we're still live streaming, so if we could be quiet. For those who are watching on YouTube, we're just waiting for a councillor to return to the chamber. If the councillor doesn't see all of the speakers and introduction, then they will not be able to vote on the application. The councillor's just arrived back in the chamber. Okay, so we're all here now. Let's move on to agenda item 6, which is land to the west of Mansfield Road, Red Hill. We have one speaker, Robbie Locke, who's the applicant, on behalf of the applicant, Cora Holmes. You have 3 minutes and start when ready.
Good evening. My name is Robbie Locke, and I'm the Head of Planning and Strategic Lands for the applicants. I'm happy to be here tonight, supporting a clear recommendation for approval from your officers. This is an allocated site in your local plan, and as you know, your local plan involved an extensive and thorough site selection process. It went through consultation and examination to establish the principle of development on this site. Cora Holmes has previously delivered the first phase of development adjacent to this parcel, our Eagle's Edge Phase 1. We are delighted to now be in a position to once again assist the council in delivering an adopted housing allocation. Council has allocated homes to the north of Gedling as a sustainable place for new housing. It is a short walk or bike ride to local services and facilities and a short bus trip to the city centre. The site is also ideal for housing from a technical perspective. The lead local flood authority agrees that the drainage is good and that there is no risk from flooding or surface water drainage. There are no statutory environmental designations. The council's open space officer has confirmed that the level of proposed open space exceeds policy requirements. The council's tree officer is satisfied with the report submitted, and Natural England have no objections to the proposals. There will be a large area of public open space along the site's western flank, inclusive of additional play facilities to complement the play provision delivered in Phase 1. In addition to this, a considerable area of public open space is provided to the south of the site, accommodating the site's drainage basins and a range of new species-rich habitats. Overall, the site will deliver a total of 2 hectares of public open space, far in excess of the Council's requirements. This will make this development feel like a spacious and green community. And importantly, this site will deliver affordable housing. Having spent time working with the case officer and appointed experts, Cora will be delivering a total of 21 affordable homes within the schemes, both for affordable rent and first homes for first-time buyers. This is alongside the full package of financial contributions as set out in the officer's report. Cora is also pleased to be working hard to find a solution for a local resident of Gedling who has been waiting for an affordable house to meet her needs for in excess of a decade. Working in conjunction with your housing officer, Cora has secured a 2-bedroom bungalow for local resident Lucy Fisher. We are in the process of understanding how the property can be adapted to meet her specific needs. In summary, the proposed development will deliver a mix...
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. This item will be introduced by Craig Miles.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, there's a variety of committee updates to let members know about. And I'll just touch on those before I start the presentation. Obvious one, first of all, is in the committee report itself. It's referenced as 141 dwellings that are proposed in this case. It's actually 144 dwellings. Apologies, there's a typo in the report. Second point is there's 2 further letters of objection that's been received since the report's been published. All the matters raised in that objection have been dealt with in the report. Third point is there's 1 letter of support that's been received that's not been highlighted in the report, and that's been made on the following grounds. The development would provide an affordable home for a local resident with specific special need requirements. That they've been waiting on a suitable premises for a long period of time, but none are available, and buying a new home and adapting it to their needs is financially prohibitive. Now, the fourth point I'd like to make is the Deputy Leader has made what I would term a very late representation on the basis that a signalised junction should be provided to the site from Mansfield Road onto Adams Drive. Sufficient measures should be in place to limit water runoff from the site, into Phase 1, Lodge Close, Larkspur Avenue, Henry Street and Richmond Gardens. That a pedestrian-only link should be provided to the existing footpath to the south. This all become transparent as we go through the report. Additional tree planting should be provided along the green space between the private shared drive, the Suds area and adjacent area to the rear of Lodge Close, Larkspur Avenue, Henry Street and Richmond Gardens, and that there would be a loss of green space. The last point I'd like to make, Chair, is the Highway Authority have made late comment that a further condition should be made to the application requiring additional details in respect of the submitted travel plan, and that can be secured by way of a condition. They also request that obligations for 2 new bus stops be amended slightly so it could also be used to upgrade or alternatively be used to upgrade existing bus stop infrastructure. Thank you, Chair. So I'll just move on to the committee items, which is the main part of the presentation. So application site. The application site is located on the west side of Mansfield Road at Red Hill, approximately 2 kilometres to the northwest of Arnold Town Centre. It forms land to the rear of Phase 1, known as Eagle's Edge residential development, which is now being constructed and is largely occupied. The land itself is allocated in our development plan, Part 2, for the development of 150 dwellings. The site's roughly rectangular in shape and measures some 6.95 hectares. There are no built structures on the site, instead it consists of open grassland. The most notable feature on the site is its topography, as it slopes significantly from west to east, and in parts very steeply north to south on the southern part of the site. The vehicular access and pedestrian access is achieved via adjoining fields which are accessed from Adams Drive. There's also a public footpath in part to the south of the site, and if you look at that yellow dotted line, you'll see there a small proportion of the site abuts it, but it's not included in the application site itself. In terms of what's proposed, it's a full application. Just a couple of site pictures here. It's a full application for the erection of 144 dwellings, as shown on the layout plan and elevation drawings. There'll be a total of 21 different house types, and they'd range between 1 and 4 bedroomed, with a mix of detached, semi-detached and terraced housing. There'll be a large area of open space to the south and west parts of the site, and we've got some indicative images I'll show you now of what is proposed. I'll move on to that later in terms of the signalised junction. We'll keep that on. In terms of the principal development, the site's already allocated in a development plan for 550 units. In terms of the design and layout, similar to their development, it's designed with a perimeter block formation which enables continuous frontages of houses fronting onto the public road and public facade, and that enables gardens to be provided to the rear and for them to be enclosed. Each dwelling would have its own car parking space and private amenity space to the front and rear. There'll be a good range of house types, as I've mentioned, and the development would result in around 30 dwellings per hectare, which is promoted by our development plan. Accepted, the main constraint to developing the site in its entirety is topography, where there are large changes in land levels across the site, which essentially constrain the site from new development because of the costs associated with reprofiling the land. As a result, 144 are proposed and not 150 units. The impact on the layout, however, is positive, as there would be 2 hectares of open space provided within the site as a result of the only having 144 dwellings, and the requirement's only 0.2 hectares. Also considered that the street scene elevations have been submitted. I considered that to be an attractive street scene that is reflective of the wider strategic housing allocation that's already been developed. Visually, the design of the scheme is considered to be acceptable and would respect the wider character of the area. In terms of amenity for existing occupiers, the main impact would be through the continuation of the existing access from Mansfield Road into the application site via phase 1, as traffic would increase as a result of proposals and there would be some inevitable disruption during construction. However, it's always been intention that phase 2 would be accessed via phase 1, and the layout that was previously approved took account of this requirement. I should also say at this stage it's proposed to put a traffic light junction on Mansfield Road itself. These are the technical drawings of it, and so it's the ones we've got, unfortunately, and that would be right in front of that existing access, where that pink arrow is pretty much in the at the site entrance there. Just back to amenity, we think that the existing dwellings would be set back significantly from phase 1, not to have an harmful impact on the overlooking, loss of light, sunlight, or of an overbearing impact. Planting and boundary treatment along all of the garden boundaries, the properties abut the application site, would limit noise and disturbance further, I should say at this stage, landscaping is a condition on this application, so we're expecting further details to outline the exact technical details of types of hedges, trees, etc. But the layout plan indicates areas where that would be provided. A construction management plan would also mitigate noise and disturbance during the construction period, and that's also secured by condition. We also think for future residents, the proposed dwellings would be appropriately separated from one another so that future residents would have a decent sized rear garden and no loss of amenity. Now on to highway matters. The application site would be accessed from phase 1 as discussed. A transportation assessment was submitted and a new signal control T-junction would be provided, and that would serve both phase 1 and phase 2. This has already been agreed in principle by the County Council Highway Department, and phase 1 has been modified in order to accommodate the Lodge Farm Lane development, which is on the other side of Mansfield Road, consisting of 148 dwellings. The transportation assessment concludes that the proposed development would not result in an adverse impact on the stud area junctions, and therefore no further mitigation is proposed other than the traffic light improvement. Further detail has also been provided to demonstrate that all internal roads have all necessary visibility requirements and ability for refuge vehicles to comfortably enter, manoeuvre and exit the site. As a result, development proposals would not result in any adverse impact on the surrounding highway network, and no mitigation are required in respect of the proposals. The Highway Authority have responded to state that they have no objections and they agree with the conclusions of the transportation assessment, subject to a range of conditions. In relation to parking provision, the number of spaces actually exceeds our supplementary planning document by at least 35 spaces. Now, in regard to what I've just said, the level of car parking provision and the access mean that we are content with the access and level of parking within the site. In terms of ecology, the last speaker highlighted there would be some improvement in biodiversity gain. This is to do with the planting of the areas of open space, which would be significant. Also should be acknowledged that Policy 18 states that loss of habitat should be weighed against the benefits of the proposal, and similar to the last application, there isn't a technical requirement for 10% biodiversity net gain, simply because this application was submitted some time ago. In terms of flooding and drainage, a flood risk assessment, a drainage strategy has been submitted in support of the application, which identifies that the site falls within flood zone 1, so it's of a low risk of flooding. The Environment Agency do not object to the proposals. In the area there are surface and foul water sewerage facilities that the development can link into. And it's expected that any foul sewage could be pumped to Trent water sewage system to the south of the site that was previously approved as part of phase 1. Surface water is intended to be linked to a drainage pond located on the southern part of the site with permeable pavement and soakaways that would also function as a holding area for surface water in terms of high water volume. The Lead Flood Authority have no objections to their overall drainage strategy as a concept, but request a condition detailing and requesting technical further information in respect of the drainage strategy. And as such, on this basis, there's no objections to flooding or drainage. Let's now move on to planning obligations. It gets a little bit complicated here, Chair. In terms of the planning obligations, the amount of affordable housing proposed to be delivered is reduced because of the increased costs associated with developing the site. I'll just run you through that. So then PPF advises that planning obligations must only be sought where they are necessary, directly related to development and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to development. So in this instance, a financial viability assessment was submitted by the applicant, and it concludes it is able to support all of the planning obligations with the exception of affordable housing, in part, largely due to the scheme not reaching the benchmark land value. It states that there is no financial headroom available to provide 11 first homes and 31 affordable rented dwellings on the site. And if it were, the scheme would be unviable, simply wouldn't go ahead. The primary reason being that our normal costs associated with developing the site are unusually high. This is mainly due to the topography of the site and the requirement to reprofile the site and erect retaining walls. The total abnormal cost is some £4.5 million. The conclusion of the assessment of the viability submission is that there would only be viable if the level of affordable housing was reduced to 21 units instead of 42, and that would comprise of 15 first homes and 6 affordable rented premises. All other obligations would be met. Now, this includes a contribution of £78,000 towards primary care provision, NHS primary care provision, a local authority contribution of just shy of £800,000, a contribution of £35,000 to encourage new residents to use the bus services, a contribution of £57,400 to create 2 new bus stops on each side of Mansfield Road, or bus stops improvement, or a combination of the both, and a contribution of £5,074 towards library provision. In summary, it's accepted that providing a higher proportion of affordable housing, a lower proportion, Chair, would affect... Can I just start that one again? In summary, it's accepted that providing a higher proportion of affordable housing would make the scheme effectively unviable, and it would be unreasonable to insist on its inclusion, given the reference to this matter in Local Plan Policy LPD 36. Even though there are significant costs to development at the site, 15 first homes and 16 affordable units would still be delivered, as well as all of the other obligations. The applicant has provided a statement agreeing to providing these contributions through a Section 106 agreement, should planning permission be granted. All of the above contributions are considered to comply with the relevant guidance in respect of being pertinent to the application under consideration. As such, the development is therefore deemed to comply with the NPPF and development plan. In relation to other matters, there is a public right-of-way to the south of the site. This would not be stopped up or diverted as a result of these proposals. Although there is no particular plans to provide a link to the public right-of-way, there is a requirement for the applicant to provide a landscaping scheme whereby access could be gained to the footpath, which is the applicant is willing to provide. In summary, it's considered that the proposed development is consistent with local and national planning policies. The principle of development is acceptable on this allocated site. The design, scale and layout of the proposal is considered to be acceptable, does not have an unacceptable impact on the character or visual amenity of the area. The reduced level of affordable housing is considered to be justified and acceptable. There would be no adverse impact on residential amenity of existing or future occupiers, and parking at the site and access is considered acceptable. There are no other concerns in respect of flooding, drainage, archaeology, noise and contamination. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions outlined in the report and the owner entering into a planning obligations, securing planning obligations through a Section 106 agreement with this authority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. I'd like to propose agenda item 6 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ellis. Thank you. Do we have any speakers on this item? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, like I said on the last one, another application on a site that's within the local plan, so we can't say no at this point really without it risking it going to appeal. Just on surface water and drainage, if I may, and I do get quite frustrated at this, so I apologise in advance. The lead flood authority have asked for further details and then suggested a condition. Will the development be prevented from going ahead even if we vote to approve it until those details have been submitted to the County Council and then approved by Nottinghamshire County Council? And although it might not be in a flood zone, which I've heard during the presentation, I'm not frankly bothered about the site flooding whilst it's in development. What we've got to be careful of is runoff into the existing properties and businesses and the roads around there whilst it is in development. And it's just really, really, really frustrating that we hear that the Flood Authority have asked for more details, yet the application's here for us to vote on it before those details have been reviewed and accepted by the Flood Authority. And for me, and it might just be me, and I'm happy for it just to be me if others don't agree, for me, I would delay this decision until it comes back to us with all the details and we can have it in black and white that the Flood Authority either agree with it or not, because we're making a decision based on information that can be submitted after we've made our decision. And I just find that unacceptable. I really, really do, because water runoff is causing havoc across our borough. It really is, and we need to stand up to it.
Thank you. Craig?
Yeah, I think Councillor Condition 7 would cover off most of what you say, but yeah, I take your point. The general approach to drainage on the bigger sites is to submit an overall concept of how you drain the site and deal with foul sewerage, and we consult the Flood Authority on that basis. The actual technical points, in terms of sewage, that would also be covered by the building regulations process. But if you look at Condition 7, there is a very specific condition in terms of flow rates, etc. But there's also a requirement in there for details to be provided during the construction period for drainage of the site, because with the site being so varied in terms of its topography, I think that's an important consideration, and that is secured by Condition 7, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you, Chair. As we've already heard, this is an allocated site. We've been expecting this development to come for some time now, and I'm glad to see it is here. I'm a little disappointed that that it's not proving possible to provide the full affordable housing requirement to be fully policy compliant, but I do at least acknowledge that there is some affordable housing in the plan, and I also do note with pleasure that other obligations as detailed in a Section 106 agreement are all fully policy compliant, and that is very much to be welcomed. So therefore, on balance, I think I am minded to support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis?
Thank you, Chair. I'd echo the comment on Section 106 on the affordable housing. Disappointed to see another scheme being brought forward which doesn't provide the full range of affordable housing. I don't know whether it's a success that the applicant initially wanted 0% affordable housing, so at least we're halfway towards our policy. I suppose we're lumbered with that. Couple of points of clarification, please. Well, first of all, I suppose the comment from Mr. Miles about the landscaping scheme and missing the link to Bestwood Country Park would be missing a great opportunity. But if that can be dealt with as part of the landscaping, that's fine. I echo Councillor Smith's comments about flooding. The runoff is an issue, and there needs to be made sure that that's dealt with before development starts, and obviously in the condition there. And then Condition 4 is about the junction onto the Mansfield Road. Can I just be clear? Would Condition 4 provide what most of us would regard as a signalised control, even though it's across the two roads, the access to this site and Lodge Farm? Thank you.
Thank you. Craig?
Yeah, it would be a signalised control, Chair. And in response to the other question about the footpath, we have control of everything up to the red line boundary. An applicant can do anything they can within the red line boundary they've applied for. So in terms of links to the footpath, they could, in theory, as part of the landscaping, provide some link to it, and we could discharge that through the landscaping scheme. What they may not be able to do is provide a direct link, because we're not unsure of the land ownership between the boundary of the site and the footpath. But that can be secured in terms of informal access to the site, which would remain open should permission be granted from the footpath into the site.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Just a quick point on the affordable housing numbers. Can you tell me those numbers again, what it should be and what we've got, please? And then I'll just come back if that's okay, Chair.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, sure. Affordable housing numbers, what should it be in terms of the full development, in terms of what is actually, in terms of the total house number development, and what it actually is, please? And then I'll come back if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pass this on to Craig.
Yeah, Chair, it's 42 units should have been provided, it's policy compliant, and we're actually getting 21 units. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So just on that then. So is our policy not fit for purpose, or why are we in a place where our affordable housing requirement is not meeting the ability for the developer to make a development financially viable, or not? And if that's the case, are we looking to adapt and change that policy in order to resolve that issue going forward? Because otherwise we're going to be in this position every single time, having to be disappointed, as councillors have mentioned, on the fact that things aren't being developed as they should be in terms of numbers. And if so, when is that happening, or when will we be discussing it in terms of planning committee going forward, or in terms of full council? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. So in terms of a review of the affordable housing policy, that will be a matter that will be referred to Cabinet in due course. In terms of whether that policy is fit for purpose, most of the developments which are approved are actually in conformity with the affordable housing policy. The only developments that aren't approved in accordance with the policy is where there's a viability issue. On this particular site, as outlined by Mr Miles in his presentation earlier, there are some significant issues with site levels. So the land rises quite steeply. There'll be a requirement for the site to be reprofiled, and there will be a number of retaining walls that need to be constructed as part of the development. So I think Mr Miles pulled out a figure earlier on of in excess of £4 million of abnormal costs. So that is quite unusual, whereas there are other sites in the borough where there aren't abnormal costs and the affordable housing policy is applied, and we would expect full conformity with that policy. But the policy will be reviewed in due course. That will be linked into a review of the community infrastructure levy, because the evidence base is the same, but that will be a decision which will be made by Cabinet, and Planning Committee will be, they will be consulted and kept fully informed in terms of a policy review.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. The only small part I was going to mention was, in which case, I suppose, is a question of the original viability of the site, full stop. In terms of this being brought forward as a future development site, if it's not financially viable, doesn't, in order to meet our standard policy in terms of affordable development, and how would a site like this end up in development in the first place, bearing on mind that obviously the site isn't suitable for a development to achieve policy within Gedling's terms, with the right figures being encompassed within that?
I think at the time when the site was allocated, not all of the abnormal costs were known at that time, and it should be identified that previously at the front of the site there was actually a factory building on there, so it was a former metallifacture site, and then this site was at the rear. So things do come to light post allocation, But it's been a very detailed piece of work which has been undertaken, which has actually highlighted the need for additional works to bring the site forward. So I think this site is somewhat unusual.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? Right, shall we move to the vote? We're voting on agenda item 6. The recommendation is to grant permission. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous, so it's carried. Shall we move on to agenda item 7, site of Daybrook Laundry? We have one speaker on this item, James Hanna, who is the applicant, which is McCarthy Stone. As usual, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members. The application before you relates to a brownfield site within the main urban area of Daybrook and Arnold, benefiting from a housing allocation within your adopted local plan. Our proposals are for a 51-bedroom retirement living scheme over 3 storeys with a communal lounge, residence garden, car parking and all associated works. Since submitting our application in September 2023, we have established and maintained a really positive dialogue with your officers, and I am pleased to see this reflected in the positive recommendation this evening. Ahead of submission, McCarthy Stone undertook a community consultation exercise that involved writing to 245 neighbouring residents and businesses. An overwhelming 83% of those who responded were in full support. Throughout the planning process, we have responded to officer and consultee comments alike to ensure that all technical information has been provided. This includes additional information in relation to drainage, SUDs, and justification for the proposed 20 car parking spaces for the scheme. This is based on our own knowledge and experience of our other sites for this product, whereby a lower proportion of car ownership has been observed. The sustainability of the site and access to nearby services and facilities also supports this. And upon review by your officers, they also consider that the car parking ratio is acceptable. The proposals secure on-site biodiversity net gain improvements through a comprehensive landscaping scheme, including the planting of 16 new trees and a wildflower meadow on the western boundary. The design of the building ensures a modern development whilst respecting the local character of the area, which is dominated by a red brick vernacular. The construction process will also utilise modern methods of construction in order to provide a building envelope that exceeds building regulation requirements. The use of air source heat pumps, solar panels, EV charging points also demonstrates our commitment to low carbon technologies. Turning attention towards financial contributions, the proposal before you is viability tested. It concludes the development is unable to support affordable housing due to the scheme not reaching the benchmark land value, nor is there financial headroom available for planning obligations. This has been critically assessed by our independent viability consultant, including sensitivity testing of our appraisal. However, notwithstanding the viability constraints, which is due to elevated enabling works costs and absence of formal contributions, we remain 100% committed to this site. Through our strategic partnership with Homes England, we intend to deploy housing grant to offer a specific older person shared ownership scheme. This will enable potential homeowners to acquire a property at 75% or less than its market value in order to broaden the affordability of our development. The result is an application that has support from all statutory consultees. Our proposals secure the full and efficient redevelopment of an allocated vacant brownfield piece of land. Principles.
Your time is up. Sorry. Okay. Craig will introduce this item also.
Thank you, Chair. It's not quite as complicated as the last site. The application site relates to the former Daybrook Laundry site, which is located to the north of the existing Aldi store on Sir John Robinson Way, and is to the west of Mansfield Road. It's effectively to the rear of the Premier Inn, if anyone knows that. It forms part of the main urban area of Arnold. The site comprises of a partially cleared vacant brownfield site made up of mixture of hard-standing, partially demolished brick structures on a site that was previously used as a laundry and cleaning depot. There's an area of scrub planting and grassland around its perimeter in places. Got some pictures of the site. That's the site allocation. Some of the images of the site. Site layout. A bit of an issue in terms of site topography. To the rear of the site, say to the rear, so the west boundary of the site, there's quite a change in land levels from those houses that you can see to the west of the site there, and the actual site level where that L-shaped buildings would be located. The site's not in a conservation area. It's in flood zone 1, which is the lowest level of flood risk, and there's no statutory designations on or directly alongside the site. So full planning permission is sought for 51 retirement living apartments, and it will be housed within a 3-storey purpose-built retirement living building. The proposed building would comprise of self-contained apartments, so it'd be 15 2-bed apartments and 36 1-bed apartments distributed across 3 floors. The footprint would be L-shaped and centrally located. There would be a total of 20 off-street car parking spaces and 2 disabled spaces included within that 20. And the access would be from Sir John Robinson Way, which would be an extension of that little road from Mansfield Road that leads round into Aldi Car Park. The access road itself would be 6 metres wide and would be a pedestrian foot link that would tie into the existing footpath adjacent to Aldi. There would be an area of communal ground surrounding the building. To the rear of the building, a steep embankment on the west side, as mentioned, would be landscaped, and a fence erected on the boundary with dwellings backing onto the application site at Browning Close. Now, I think the point I was trying to make earlier in terms of the cross-section, particularly at bottom one, you'll see that the land level for those houses at Browning Close to the rear are much higher than the ground floor level of the proposed building. So in terms of the principle of development, the site is already allocated in the development plan for development 50 dwellings. In terms of the design and layout, as mentioned, it would be centrally located and 3 storeys in height. It'd actually be positioned to the rear of the Premier Inn, and there'd be very limited public views of the site from Mansfield Road. You'd really only see it if you're coming round into Aldi Car Park. As mentioned, the floor levels would differ from other residential properties to the rear. It would be sort of sunken down, although it would be 3 storeys in height. The internal layout we consider would have an appropriate size facility for retirement living for future residents with sufficient communal areas. So in summary, consider that the proposed development layout is considered acceptable and result in a development that would be well designed and be of appropriate scale, be in keeping with its surroundings. In terms of amenity, owing to the position and orientation of other dwellings and buildings alongside the site, there wouldn't be any real prospects of any overlooking or overshadowing on the site, simply owing to topography and the distance to other dwellings. Just touch on highway safety and parking. So, as mentioned, the site will be accessed from John Robinson Way. There'll be 20 spaces, and within that 10 electrical vehicle charging spaces would be provided. In terms of the actual number of spaces, if we apply our own guidance, there's a requirement for 0.8 spaces per apartment. And this is the starting point for assessing car parking requirements. But it also says in our SPD that the expectation is that parking standards will be met. However, If development is served by one or more regular public transport services, it may be a material consideration in justifying a reduced parking provision, especially if the site is located within or close to a central area. The applicant states in the planning statement the site benefits from a good vehicular and pedestrian connectivity within the immediate and surrounding area. Indeed, there's bus stops with services running in both directions towards Nottingham city centre and Mansfield, less than 150 metres from the site. And there's infrastructure there already that includes stroke curbing, tactile pavement, crossing points, road markings and barriers, etc., to encourage that from the application site. The applicant also states in their supporting statement that the provision of 20 spaces is appropriate and justified given the retirement living model, which generates less car parking requirement and vehicle movements compared to more conventional residential developments. Transportation has also been provided that compares other similar developments in England to what is proposed here, and unsurprisingly concludes that requirement is reduced because vehicle movement amongst retirement living apartment developments is the full allocation is not required in essence. So nevertheless, the Highway Authority has been consulted and they initially requested 4 additional spaces. It's not been provided. They have since been reconsulted and come to the conclusion it would not harm the highway network, and overall they do not object to the proposals. So in this scenario, it can be considered a reduced parking requirement can be justified given the nature of the development as retirement living apartments, which can be secured via condition and ensure at least one occupant of each apartment is 60 years or over. It's also been demonstrated that the site is accessible by other means of transport and is well connected to public services. In terms of planning obligations, it's a little bit more complicated now. Usually there's a requirement to provide 30% of affordable housing in this location, together with planning obligations for NHS provision, bus stop improvements and library enhancements. Similar to last application, where NPPF advises that the planning obligations must only be sought where necessary, directly related to the development and fairly unreasonably related in scale and kind to the development. In this instance, a financial viability assessment was submitted with the application. It concludes that development is unable to support any on-site or off-site affordable housing or contributions, largely due to the scheme not reaching the benchmark land value. It states that there's no financial headroom available for planning obligations after accounting for anticipated gross receipts and all reasonable aspects of the outlay necessary to develop the site. In that scenario, the scheme produces a deficit of around £790,000 and therefore unable to provide any obligations. An externally appointed independent viability expert has reviewed the assessment and he concludes, with a fixed developer profit of 20% on revenue and nil planning policy contributions, the scheme does result in a negative residual land value. And this is below the benchmark land value of £330, and it's deemed unviable even before any planning policy contributions are factored in. Now, he's also taken account of a scenario if sale values were to increase by 5% and construction costs remained the same, and the conclusion is that it would still be unviable because it'd be below the benchmark land value. So in this scenario, no such obligations are therefore sought. And separately, matters relating to trees, ecology, drainage have all been addressed in the report and secured by conditions, and there's no objections to those matters. In conclusion, Chair, it's recommended that despite not having affordable housing or contributions, that the site is in a sustainable location and would provide 51 retirement living apartments. The principle of development is acceptable in this location. The design, scale and layout of the proposal is considered to be acceptable and does not have an unacceptable impact on the character or visual amenity of the area. The reduced level of affordable housing and for contributions is considered to be justified. The proposal would not have unacceptable impact on residential amenity in terms of overlooking or massing. The reduced parking and access at the site is considered acceptable, and there are no other concerns in relation to flooding, drainage, archaeology, noise or contamination. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I'd like to propose agenda item 7 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson, thank you. Thank you. Does anybody want to speak on this item? Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very glad to see that good use is being made of this previously industrial site. It seems to be as I said, good use for it, and it's nice to see it coming into use. I am, however, disturbed that the parking provision is so low, and I take the point that car ownership may be, car ownership may very well be reduced in a retirement settlement. However, 60 is still working age, and we have the possibility of the loss of residents in the future will actually still be working and not indeed retired, and owners of cars. I understand that the space is limited, but I would ask that perhaps a condition be put on to try and squeeze another, say, 3 or 4 places somewhere on that land without detracting from the landscaping. It would, however, be rather nice to see from passing on Mansfield Road a little bit of greenery. So if there is a chance of getting another little bit of space for cars to mitigate the effect of the higher retirement age, I would be very pleased. On the whole, though, it looks like a nice development. Thank you.
If I could just come back in terms of the car parking provision, I know there's been extensive dialogue between the case officer and the applicant, and their final position is the numbers which are set out in the plans which are proposed. So to add a further condition, the application needs to be considered on the basis of the information submitted. So it wouldn't be reasonable to add a further condition. And I would add that the Highways Authority does support that, well, they raise no objection to the level of provision proposed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. It is certainly welcome to see this site finally developed. It's been empty and cleared for far too long without being developed. And there is much to commend the development. The actual building itself, I think, is a very welcome addition. My reservations are, as Councillor Strong said, in terms of the level of the parking provision. I understand what is being said, though, by the officers. But I'm also particularly disappointed that there are no financial contributions at all. So there's no affordable housing, no Section 106 agreement, and that is very disappointing. I understand that we have a viability assessment in front of us, so it is what it is, and it wouldn't cause me to oppose the development on that basis. Yeah, I'm just frustrated and about it. Just a question that either for Mr. Avery or Mr. Miles that perhaps they could answer. I can recall a couple of developments in the past where the developer has provided a viability assessment that showed it wouldn't be viable with contributions. And we've been assured that should the financial, the economic position improve in the future, that is something that could be revisited if the site hadn't already been developed. I'm just wondering whether that might be a possibility in this case, should the position change.
Thank you. It's something that we did give consideration to in terms of whether we could require a reassessment in a set period of time. In this instance, though, it's an apartment block. So usually, once development is commenced on an apartment block, the block would need to be completed before it was occupied. So the planning permission has a life of 3 years. And I think the previous schemes that you referred to, that was development comprised of apartments and dwellings, so it was a range of housing types on a site, whereas this is a discrete development of one apartment block. So for that reason, and given that the development would need to be commenced within a period of 3 years, we didn't feel that that was necessary or reasonable in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think there's any question of whether we need more retirement living apartments or brownfield development, which is very welcome to see on this site. It's just very, very, very disappointing, as other councillors have said, that there's not adequate parking, even though there's plenty of space on the site where extra parking could be provided. 18 spaces, and I know the officer referred to 20, 2 of them are disabled spaces, so they're restricted. So I'll say 18 spaces for 51 apartments just simply isn't enough, and it goes against our policy as it's not enough. But then, as I've said in planning meeting after planning meeting after planning meeting, our policy then says, but if you're near a good bus service, don't worry, we don't have to provide you parking. But then we cannot restrict people moving into there to only those that get the bus. We can't do that. So that bit of the policy really isn't worth the paper it's written on, and I've said that before, and I'll keep saying it till it changes, because it needs to change. Also, what hasn't been mentioned yet, there's no visitor parking. Somebody made reference, I think it was the officer in the presentation, that over 60s, or implied that over 60s are more or less likely to drive. I don't agree with that, because they are of working age. But if you are of an elder age, you're more likely to have visitors to your property as well. There's no visitors parking on site, which that coupled with the fact that there's not enough spaces full stop for those who live in it is just going to shift the problem onto nearby residential properties and highways. And what will happen is those residents will then write to councillors in this room or county councillors asking for parking restrictions on their road, and the taxpayers pick the bill up and it shifts the problem elsewhere. I'm really minded to vote against this application, reluctantly, because I want brownfield site development and I want retirement apartments development. But if we vote against it, it might make the developer go back and come back with better and adequate parking, which there's clearly space for on site.
Thank you. Just a clarification from Craig, the total number of parking spaces on this site, please.
Yeah, it's a total of 20. 2 of those are disabled spaces, as Councillor pointed out, Chair. So there's a total of 20, 2 of which are disabled spaces.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, really just to echo what Councillor Smith has said. I mean, we mentioned that highways have no objection to the number of parking spaces. They have highlighted it, but obviously the parking space issue is not a highway policy. It's a Gedling Borough Council policy, and Gedling Borough Council's policy clearly states 0.8 parking spaces. It does also add the point that Councillor Smith's made around the bus access. But again, when residents are applying to other councils for things like resident parking schemes, they're as a result of knock-on effects of inadequate parking being provided for too dense housing. And the reality is here is that we're dealing with a high density and a low ability to actually conform with our own policy. I don't understand why we're doing that. I don't get why we're sat here being asked to make a decision based on something that goes, I mean, it's not even like a tiny bit off the policy. I mean, it's less than half of what our requirement is, which I just find it incredible that we're sat here looking at this. Now, we're back at viability again. We talked about viability earlier. This is not a viable site for this development. There's no contributions going to the local authority. There's no paying for doctors. There's no paying towards the highway. There's none of that. None of that's going. We're not gaining any benefit from that in a local authority and the residents that are going to live there move in from an outside area. The local authority isn't going to get any benefit of that to provide services for them. I find that strange. I find that strange that we're dealing with not only a parking policy that's not being followed, but we're also dealing with a policy where we're not providing any benefit to local Gedling Borough or the wider county to maintain those people when they join our borough. So I don't get why it's here. I don't get why. I accept that people can apply for planning policy on anything, even land they don't own. I accept that. But I also don't accept why we're sat here with a decision that is, let's go ahead, because what we're saying is let's go ahead against our own policies in planning. And although I understand that planning in the decision point is done by councillors, we are led and guided by planning guidance that is given by this council, and yet we are not just going against one of those policies, we are also not catering for the needs of those residents once they enter our local society. I cannot, for those conditions, back this application under any circumstances within those points.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item at all? Okay, so we'll move to the vote. We're voting on agenda item 7. All those in the recommendation is to grant permission. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? And any abstentions? So that is carried. We'll move on to agenda item 8, Eagle Square, Front Street, Arnold. There are no speakers on this item, and it's Nigel Bryan to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for a 12-month period for the change of use of land at Eagle Square, for the 12 stalls on the market there. Permission was granted in December 2020 for the same, although that permission has now lapsed. Should permission be granted over the next 12 months, the Council will undertake a full review of the permanent location of the market within Arnold Town Centre in consultation with market traders and residents. The application site is outlined on the slide before you. You can see the market has obviously been operating for a number of years now. And these are the stalls that are currently on site. And just a picture of the same. But in short, it's just looking to renew and now extend permission to enable the council to work out where the future of the market is over the next 12 months and enable that review to undertake place. And the recommendation is to approve as outlined on pages 118 to 119 of the committee report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to propose item 8 for the purpose of debate. To have a seconder? Councillor Pearson, thank you. Anyone want to speak on this item? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm fully in support of this extension, but it's the market holders that I feel sorry for. Extension after extension after extension has been applied for to this council by ourselves with no reassurance. These people have mortgages to pay, they have families to look after. They've got no assurance whatsoever once this 12 months runs out, or 8 months, 6 months until we reapply again. It's time this council, and I know it's not for this planning committee, but it's time this council gave the stallholders some assurance and some future. And with that said, I'll vote for the 12-month extension just to give them that little bit of reassurance.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? Okay, shall we move to the vote? So we're voting on agenda item 8. The recommendation is to grant permission. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item 9, Richard Herod Centre, Foxhill Road, Central, Colton. And Nigel Bryan will introduce this one also.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for a storage container on land in the rear of changing rooms on the playing fields adjacent to the Richard Herod Leisure Centre. It will be sited to the rear of the building, as you can just see in the centre of the site. Originally, it was proposed to be sited closer to the residential units, but it's now proposed to be sited, immediately adjacent to the actual changing rooms to reduce its visual impact on those nearby neighbours. This is the structure. It would be similar to basically a shipping container. I think it's going to be used for the storage of nets and the corner flags, etc. But the visual impact, given its location, is not considered to be significant. It will be sited adjacent to the actual building, to this side of the grass, roughly in this location here. So in terms of the impact on visual amenity and residential amenity, it's considered to be acceptable, and there's no overriding policy concerns, and therefore the application is recommended for approval as outlined on page 125 of the committee report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to propose item 9 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearson, thank you. Does anybody want to speak on this item? All right, shall we move to the vote? So the recommendation is to approve. All those in favour? That's unanimous, so that's carried. So we'll move on to agenda item 10, which is for noting, result of an appeal. Any comments on this item? We're happy to note it? Okay, yep, I see your nods. We'll move on to agenda item 11, future applications, which is for noting. Any comments at all? Right, happy to note it? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 12, which is the planning delegation panel action sheets, which is for noting. Are we happy to note it? Yeah. And finally, item 13, there's no urgent business, so I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you.